think that this exposes that Nicola Sturgeon has got herself in a tangle about this. And
That's the man behind the now infamous interview with Nicola Sturgeon, ITV Scotland correspondent Peter Smith. Nicola Sturgeon has bet her reputation, and therefore the reputation of the SNP, on this one complicated and emotional subject. Something until now Nicola Sturgeon has said unequivocally is a simple matter of wrong and right. If you agree with her, you are right. If you don't, you are bigoted and transphobic, which, by the way, is at least 60% of the Scottish people. And even racist. Confusing, but why the fuck not, Nicola? Yet, it's not hyperbole to say that she fell to pieces trying to answer the most fundamental question. Is a trans woman a woman? She stumbled, stuttered, and ultimately proved herself to be all the things she had accused everyone else of. Jeezy peeps, man. Let's watch this interview because I think it's very balanced and insightful.
Questions. And Peter, it's such a sensitive issue, but you pursued with this what is to many people the absolutely vital line. And I think it would interest trans women as well as everybody, everybody, which is, at what point does Nicola Sturgeon stop considering trans women women? And it seems to be, as she answered to you, as Richard just said, the point at which they're convicted of a crime and imprisoned. What did you make of what she said?
I think that this exposes that Nicola Sturgeon has got herself in a tangle about this. And it is important, Susanna, that you'd said that this is of interest to both sides of this debate, because while untangling the argument and seeing Nicola Sturgeon wrong-footed or flustered over an issue which she really should have been very confident on, because these are the fundamental questions of the trans debate, not an area that's unfamiliar to her. It's an issue which she has staked her reputation and her career on, now in a constitutional clash with Westminster over her right to make it easier and faster for people in Scotland to legally change gender. So she should be very aware of these issues. And yes, it has been of great interest to people who are opposed to that change in legislation, saying this exposes how poorly thought out the legislation is and how unfamiliar she is with the issue. But I think it's important to say as well that before we do these reports, we have to educate ourselves as journalists. And I'd spoken to trans friends, trans activists, understanding their concerns about changes to the prison policy. And they were saying, well, is Nicola Sturgeon still a trans ally? She has, again, staked her reputation on it. She stood side by side with us. But when there was public pressure, immense public pressure, following the very public scandal of two horrific criminals, a double rapist who had raped as a man while, after being convicted, had transitioned to a woman and now wants to be moved to a women's prison, Isla Bryson, and then days later, Tiffany Scott, who had stalked a teenage girl and then assaulted a nurse, assaulted a female prison officer. Again, after these events, decided to transition, now wants to self-identify as a woman, be moved to a women's prison. Two high-profile public events created immense pressure on Nicola Sturgeon, and these trans people were saying, has she buckled under pressure? Is she now, as you said, is she putting caveats on the trans mantra that all women are women? Well, in Nicola Sturgeon's eyes, if you'd asked her that question 2 weeks ago, I don't think she would have been so easily flustered.
You were there. We saw it as a piece of television in 2D, in 2 dimensions. You were there in reality, in 3D. What was your reading as a journalist of her? Well, what came across as incoherence in the face of those very straightforward questions? How do you think she was feeling as you were asking her those questions?
I think that there was a realization in her eyes and in her manner that this is an extremely complicated and emotive subject, which maybe seems obvious, but that's actually something that Scotland's First Minister has until now played down on her attempts to push through the gender reforms in Scotland. As I say, making it easier and faster for people to change gender, lowering the legal age from 18 to 16. She has been questioned about potential controversies and played down the likelihood. And then it's often the case when the theory meets reality, does it stand up to scrutiny? And I guess when you can see Nicola Sturgeon, who is not an unintelligent person, a supremely intelligent person, a very composed leader, very very coherent in interviews normally, when you can see her starting to fluster over, I say, what is actually not a kind of niche part of the debate, but a fundamental part of it. I think that's a moment where Nicola Sturgeon is realising that this is a really complicated issue for her. It's politically sensitive, and that perhaps, despite her saying that she doesn't need to pause and give more consideration to how legislation is drafted, maybe there is cause for her to take a moment of pause and take a breath and rethink how wording is of the legislation, how the legislation is worded going forward, because potentially this is going to open her up to all kinds of problems in the future.
It was a masterclass in very direct questioning. It really was. When the encounter was over, did she look a bit shaken up? Because she looked a bit shaken up to me watching that.
Look, in absolute fairness to Nicola Sturgeon, she's not someone who hides from interviews and tough questions. I mean,
True.
We know well on this programme that there are previous prime ministers who have literally hid from your journalists asking tough questions.
Fridges, yeah.
Now, Nicola Sturgeon, through the years, has faced tough questions, and she will stand in front of the cameras and face this scrutiny. And again, yesterday was no different. But yes, afterwards, I think there was a moment where I saw that that perhaps there was a little bit of
that didn't go well.
Doubt in her eyes.
Now, Peter does make a fair point. At least Nicola Sturgeon was willing to stand in front of the camera and make a complete twat of herself and her followers, something we can all enjoy and admire. Here's my prediction. She won't back down, no chance. She knows this is now irreversible and her reputation will be in tatters if this bill doesn't go through. She'll go out in a blaze of isms, firing insults at everyone who disagrees with her, which will ultimately end with her screaming bigot at herself in the mirror. You see, that's the thing about pretending to be woke. You can never pretend to be woke enough. The only way she can succeed now is for all the independence voters to transition and Scotland become 45% prosthetic minge and cock.